Let's bring in NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Garrett Haake, who joins us from Beijing. Garrett, good to see you as always. So we heard the president say very clearly they made fantastic trade deals, great for both countries. So break that down and how it plays out with their goals heading into this final day.
Yeah, Francis, I think you heard both leaders there kind of illuminate what were their goals going into this summit. The president with an economic focus, suggesting that these great trade deals have been made, although providing no detail or context to support that. In fact, in an interview overnight, he spoke about an agreement to purchase Boeing planes, saying that he thought it was a commitment, but couldn't nail down the specific number there. Also speaking about Iran, this has been another major goal of the United States to get China more involved in bringing the Iran conflict to a close. Of course, China is the primary purchaser of Iranian oil. Yesterday, in the dueling readouts from the first part of this, the United States readout had mentioned Iran, the Chinese readout hadn't. And so I think that's notable that the president kind of injected Iran as a topic into this second day's sort of opening bid, if you will. And as for the Chinese, their primary goal in a lot of this summit was to project stability in the world's most important economic relationship and to essentially keep moving that relationship forward without disruption. You heard those welcoming comments from President Xi, kind of flattering President Trump a little bit about the importance of this relationship and the importance of this moment. That's something that President Trump wants to hear, and something that the Chinese, I think, generally want to convey, that there will be no major disruptions, no big changes in the way in which these two economic competitors who are so closely intertwined will go about their business going forward for the next 6 months or so, until the next time these two leaders are scheduled to meet.
Yeah, I mean, Garrett, President Trump has claimed China offered to help broker peace with Iran even before he left on this trip and during the trip. He said, we're good. We don't need their help. But he also said today that China has agreed not to give military equipment to Iran, but we're also learning the kind of loophole here involving maybe a third-party country.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. I mean, the president has offered sometimes contradictory statements about how involved he wanted China to be in helping bring this war to a close. Going back to the start of the ceasefire, he praised the Chinese government at that time for helping to bring Iran to the negotiating table. He suggested today again that the two have the same broad goals here, that Iran not have a nuclear weapon and that the Strait of Hormuz be reopened. That is important for Chinese commerce. They get significant amounts of energy and other products through the Strait, whether they come from Iran or whether they come from their other Gulf partners. But on the idea of weapons being provided, this comes from our colleague Dan DeLuce, who reported, citing two sources familiar, that there were some discussions with Chinese companies and Iran about trying to provide weapons to the Iranians in this conflict, perhaps using third parties or third countries to ship those weapons more discreetly. The president said overnight that Xi Jinping told him that would certainly not be the case, that he had made a commitment that those kinds of deals would not go through. For what it's worth, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs also denies that reporting, saying it's a smear of the Chinese. But I think it does speak to the complicated international dynamics here between China, the U.S., and Iran. Iran has long been a foil of the United States. Iran and the Chinese have trading relationships going back hundreds of years. It's a very important relationship between those two countries. So there are a lot of sort of interconnected dynamics at play here.
Yeah, well, on the topic of Taiwan, off the top, that was paramount for President Xi, and he even said, cautioned about the conflicts, the clashes that could jeopardize things between the two countries. What does President Xi want from President Trump on this front? And what are we hearing about any potential trade deals that may result from that?
On Taiwan specifically, the Chinese have a couple of goals. I mean, the Chinese and the U.S. see this issue fundamentally differently. For China, Taiwan is as much a part of China as Texas is to the United States. They don't see any difference between Taiwan and mainland China. They would love to see the United States change their rhetorical position on Taiwan, or at least stop selling the Taiwanese weapons. So U.S. Congress has approved already another $14 billion in arms sales to Taiwan that is essentially waiting on the president's signature to go through. And so the Chinese, I mean, to the point of those dueling statements again, were quick yesterday to point out that they see Taiwan as the major potential issue in the U.S.-China relationship, one that could lead to future conflict. What we've heard from U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, is kind of downplaying that's what the Chinese often say, that the U.S. position on Taiwan hasn't changed. How it affects trade, I think, is notable. And again, we've gotten no specifics on this, but I think the presence of Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, I mean, Taiwan has made itself essentially the world capital of microchip productions, the chips that are essential to the development of AI. You know, their commercial role to both countries, I think, has a lot of upside, and whether there's news to be made there or a deal to be done there, I think is the kind of thing that President Trump is interested in. But again, we've heard no announcements, only kind of potential there.
I'm glad you brought up Texas, Garrett, because I want to bring up that and talk about where we are with this as far as the president is saying that China will consider buying oil from the U.S., possibly sending ships to Texas, Louisiana, and Alaska, and also even Boeing getting involved with 200 Boeing jets.
Yeah, look, I mean, on oil and natural gas, this has been a priority for the president going back to the campaign. He has wanted to see the U.S. become the world's dominant energy player, and in a lot of ways it has. And the U.S. is the top exporter of energy around the world right now. China does not buy a significant portion of it. Logistically, that hasn't always made much sense for them. Perhaps it could in the future. China's gone through its own energy transition. They've been trying to move away from fossil fuels. They're the world leader in solar power. They are among the world leaders in wind energy generation. Those are things that President Trump quite openly disdains. And so I think that might be more aspirational, perhaps, than realistic at this point. But it is something that the president has talked about on several occasions. As for Boeing, there has been so much ink spilled about Boeing's role in this trip. Their CEO was on the trip with the president. There was a lot of speculation that the Chinese could place one of the largest jet aircraft orders from Boeing in history. The president said in an interview last night that that number was more like 150 to 200 jets. There had been some reporting that it could be as large as 500. I think all of this is interesting and also probably falls in that aspirational category. These orders can sometimes take a decade to fulfill and can be canceled as easily as they're made. We've heard no confirmation at all from the Chinese side. So it is an interesting, obviously, Boeing, a huge American company, a huge American exporter. Those details will be closely watched by the U.S. stock market and by tens of thousands of employees who could be making those planes in the future if those orders come through. And
we'll be hearing at the culmination of day two to see what those wins are and if it involves them. Garrett Haake for us. As always, Garrett, thanks.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.